everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at Eleanor Davis's Fantagraphics book called Why Art. This is an interesting approach to comics that's a little bit more like an illustrated kids book for adults, just in terms of the way that the pictures and the words go together. So it's mostly like a big illustration across a page or a two-page spread than with a little bit of text, like I said, kind of like a kid's book. So this whole book is basically an argument for why we need art, which is actually kind of come at a good time for me because I've been questioning like art as the epitome of the thing that makes humans human, which could be a good thing and a bad thing, that we're kind of just off on our own bizarre lane, maybe over interpreting the world at all times, which is what artists tend to do. But anyways, this makes a pretty powerful argument throughout the book. So at first, she kind of throws out a couple of the elements of art. I think a lot of the why art is also wrapped up in what is art. And so Eleanor Davis is throwing out some of the elements and principles of art, but not really in like the standard way. So here she's talking about size and scale. Then she talks a little bit about the idea that artists wear a mask, or they have to wear a persona kind of through their artwork, which, I mean, obviously we all do. We can't just be our raw selves, but I don't know. I tried, and at least me, I'm trying to use art to be as much of myself as allowed by society, but I guess she's kind of covering that. So talking about the different masks that people wear to become artists, like the different motivations for people to make art, and then it digs deeper into these, like the why in terms of the art function. So here she's talking about beautiful fabrics should drape over other things and hide them away, so like ugly things. All throughout you can see that Eleanor Davis is really showing off her beautiful cartooning chops. This is kind of like someone who's doing their own editorial illustration, I guess, for their own poems, which is interesting. Then she covers the dangerous aspect of art, which I think is the thing I've been struggling lately with, and she calls this shadow box art. This is a pretty good idea of like building a fictional world. This is what she's calling shadow box artworks, can let you leave your ordinary life completely. So these fictional virtual simulations that we can enter into, mostly for entertainment. And she's talking about the fact that people can get kind of consumed in there and get lost in there. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like, I spend almost all of my time either making my own fictions or responding to other people's artistic products, and that doesn't necessarily seem healthy to me. Like, I could be out in the actual world instead of these virtual worlds. And so talking about that there, that's a constant battle that I have, dividing my time up between this kind of activity and, things with Tori and the dogs and the house and the garden and things like that. So she's addressing that in here, and I like her answer to it. Then she goes into a sequence that's imagining a couple different fictional artists and their fictional art projects to give an example of like the types of things you could do with art. So she has this artist here who's making tones, sounds. Hearing the note makes you turn different colors. This is the only time in the book where you get a color sequence, and it's really, really nice little sequence here, especially as you flip from this kind of magenta color to this like weird, I think it's like a yellowish greenish color. The color interaction there, if you know anything about color and the eye, those two really cross activate each other. So when I turned and got to this page, there was a weird like after image glow on top of this other color that was a really interesting poetics of form moment throughout the book. I doubt that would come through on camera, but this kind of thing where you're playing with the formal elements of art and the perceptual system to make a point. So that was a pretty cool little image. Then we have like a tornado happening, I believe. There's some big sequences here where a little bit more of a story kicks in, and you're watching this character basically building one of these shadow boxes. You can see this big hand here So kind of the idea that we're gods over these little stories and we can enact tragedies on the people and all of these things. But then towards the end of the book, um, Eleanor Davis is making a more interesting point that if we're basically stuck in our stories, that our whole life is kind of like a shadow box of our own making. It is a simulation. We have stepped out of reality into a simulation, not in the sense of like the world is a computer program that we're all living in, but that we're living in an environment that simulates the majority of activities for us. If we're going to live in worlds and we're going to spend most of our time in stories, like at least let's tell healthy stories and healthy fantasies. Like it may not be the best thing, even though a lot of like the work that I like the most is work that like Shuzo Oshimi, someone who deals with the really explicitly deals with like the dark, painful side of humanity, and I really like those kind of dramatic works. It's pointing out that like maybe that's not the best way to spend all your time. You know, it's a good way to get depressed and all this kind of stuff. So maybe learning how to make like healthy fantasies that train people to think in healthy patterns. I've been thinking about this a lot since Ed Pisker's passing as well. Just how much of that was caught up with so many sicknesses in our culture, whether it be, you know, this desire to be famous, the skewed perceptions we have of sex versus love, just the way our culture deals with conflict in general. These are all things that we kind of promote through the stories that we tell. And this is just making me rethink. So I think here she's saying, you know, like I guess the problem with like telling stories about how perfect the world could be is we tend to think those are boring. Me and Tori have been talking about this a lot lately too. But there is entertainment that is not melodramatic and all of that stuff. You know, you can be entertained by the animal shows that show like all the interesting facts about the world. And there's a lot of ways to be positively engaged that don't have, you know, like drama between a family and abuse and an action movie with guns. And not that we don't need those as well, but I've just been rethinking a lot. And this book, I think, really landed for me. One of the things that, like, if you're going to be engaged in art, if you're going to do art, like, you don't have to. There's no rule saying you got to make great content. But if you're going to complain about the way the world is, like, maybe try and present a better picture in the art instead of just complaining about what's wrong. So I think that's really kind of the argument she's making at the end of the book is like, we do need art. We need art for a reason. And I think there's a suggestion that we've kind of been using it wrong as we go. Here at the end of the book, there's an interesting, really strange, interesting suggestion being made where these characters now have built like simulated versions of themselves, almost like avatars within their own little shadow box that they built, and that in telling these fictions or building these fictional worlds, they've made these avatars themselves, but like stripped of their real life flaws. A little me that's smarter than I am in a real life. Better looking, they make better artwork than us and stuff. I think that's a really interesting idea. Also about creativity is that you could use it to make a better version of yourself, and that is what we should be trying to do. That aspirational aspect of artwork, you know, that these tiny little selves that we imagine could be better. It's also strange to think about this actually like in real, you know, in real life possibilities where we are like AI cloning ourselves and then making a better version. That seems like an unhealthy way to go about it. But interesting thought at the end of the book here. And then the book ends with this sequence where these kind of god characters who have built their own little shadow box selves, they come in and there is a disaster again, and they look at themselves, the smaller versions of themselves, and say, show us how to be brave, show us how to save ourselves. And I think that really is, you know, the perfect summation of why artists, what's the value of artists. I think a lot of the devaluation of artists that's been happening, and that's been pretty explicitly stated with some of the AI stuff, where it's being treated as like artistic talent is a resource that can now be redistributed, and some of the hatred towards artists that I've seen behind some of those sentiments. Not a lot, but here and there, as I paid attention to the AI stuff. I think that public distaste comes from an abuse that the arts have made, where, you know, when you go to a museum, you're much more likely to see bananas taped to the wall than something enriching and helpful to humanity, showing us how to save ourselves. We've got too down the critical, analytical, cynical path, which we needed to go down. But there is a shamanistic healing function of art that this book is kind of confirming for me as something that, you know, I've been thinking about a lot lately. So I really enjoyed this. At first, when I first started reading it, the format, I was like, ah, man, it's not really a comic. But as I read it, it's like, yeah, this is comics. This is pictures and words put together. It's just in a different way than I normally think about. And by the end of the book, I was really, really pleased with like the overall message and the overall approach that Eleanor Davis took, the way that she constructed like the argument and the story at the same time. So I thought this is a really wonderful little book. I'm glad I picked it up. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell, when you get into the theories about, you know, what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.